Well, good morning, Wrecker. We have a fun show today.
Hey Nick, how you doing?
We have Mike Teodorescu. Now I screwed it up. I was practicing before. We have Jerry Kane, and Lily Morris keeps coming in and out, but she's got audio issues, so hopefully she'll be able to join us. But welcome.
Hi guys.
Hey, thanks for having us. It's great to be here.
Thank you for having us.
So we have this special issue in MIS Quarterly, and you are the only issues and opinions piece that made it into the special issue. And Mike and Lily, I think you're fairly junior. You haven't been around the block too much at this point, but you're working with this grizzled, gray-bearded veteran of Jerry Kane. And so I have to ask you, we're going to talk about the process of your paper, and we'll talk about your paper at one point, but what I'm interested in is working with Jerry. Does he just pretty much sit back, make you do all the work, and he does virtually nothing? Tell me the truth.
Actually, Jay, it gives us a lot of really good insights, especially like what's palatable in terms of research idea, how to express ourselves, and kind of like, especially when you're really junior, you probably want to bite more than you can chew, to be honest. And Jerry's there in the background telling us, okay, that's too much. That's just all right. But
when he does it, his feet are up on the desk and his hands are behind his head.
Because I was about to say, you were just confirming what Nick believed. I mean, you just said like he sits back, in a lounge chair, probably like a leather lounge chair, really nice, in front of a mahogany desk, right? And then he tells us, "Oh, guys, this is a really good idea. You shouldn't do this, and you should rather do this." And then you have to go off, scamper off into your little offices without a window and do it. Is that correct?
He does have a very nice office. I agree. And yeah, but he does get his hands dirty. He does go through the paper. He actually went through the paper every round fully with us. So though the image of the wise sage in the background is fair.
I just help them interpret the decision letters, and this is just the SE being difficult, and we just have to keep them happy on this, but we can ignore this other stuff.
Very nice comeback, Jerry. Very nice. But in all seriousness, I mean, when we received your paper, the first immediate thing that struck me is that I had expected at that point that we get a lot of fairness papers. I expected two things. In fact, I was thinking, well, we got a lot of explainability of AI, transparency and that sort of stuff. And we get that whole fairness issue because it's really the issue of our time. And we got one or maybe two submissions addressing fairness at all. And yours was one of them. And it took a very interesting route, right? It ended up being an issues and opinion paper, although you didn't start with it being an issue and opinion paper, right? If I remember correctly, it was sort of I can't remember. Was it like it was a commentary, research article /
I think
issue?
it was always. I think it was always an issues and opinions paper, but it definitely morphed considerably throughout the process. The paper that we ended up with was an entirely different one than what we originally submitted, and I think for the better and for the more interesting. And so I will give the senior editors a hard time at multiple points throughout this podcast, but I will grudgingly confess that the guidance really did help make it a more interesting and impactful and stronger paper.
Well, what I remember with the paper is that you actually sent it to Arun Rai first.
Yes.
So it was something, so it wasn't actually sent to the special issue. And Arun sent it over and said, "Hey, do you think this would be a fit for your special issue?" So you didn't even submit it to the special issue originally.
Well, I submitted it to Arun and said, I've got two avenues on this. I didn't even know if issues and opinions, it was appropriate to submit an issues and opinions to a special issue, because I think they typically are handled by the editor-in-chief. And so it was like, okay, I've got what we think is an issues and opinions paper, which would go this route, but we have this special issue that's relevant to what's the right, and for junior scholars listening, finding the right category for a paper, I think is fairly an important decision, at least at MISQ. And I think a lot of good papers don't fit a really neat mold, and finding ways to position it so that it's the most interesting and so that it's the most unique, I think is something that I've used in my research trajectory over the years, is finding the right fit for it.
That's a good point, actually, Jerry. Yeah.
Issues and opinions are really tough to place because there's no set standard on what. All right, so for like theory papers, thought papers, empirical papers, right? For an issues and opinion, you pretty much need an issue and an opinion. What's the standard, right? How do you determine what's a good contribution there?
Yeah, and I think the standard is it just needs to be interesting. Now, what interesting is often in the eye of the beholder. It needs to be interesting and important. And fortunately, we were able to carve that out. But I find theory and issues and opinions paper to be the hardest to write, just because there's no data. I mean, it's just like it's only thought, and where the boundaries are, what you include. I said after I wrote my first theory paper is I would never write another one, and I ended up writing another one, and I will tell you again, I will never write another one. So we'll see if just because it's so painful, it's so hard because it's just a conversation. What do you put in and what do you leave out, because there are no data boundaries with it.
So where I was going with my question was actually to the idea, to the origin of the idea. Right. So I was surprised that we had so few fairness papers. I thought that was a topic of the time, or still is, of the current time with managing AI. And you were working on this topic. So Mike, Jerry, when did you start working on this? I mean, were you working on it for years and years and years and you were looking for an outlet, or did you just start working when you listened to when you found out the call for papers?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I started getting into fairness in early 2018, which was now as I was finishing up my doctoral thesis. I had an opportunity to join this research grant by USAID at MIT D Lab, which ended up funding a visiting position there as well. And the grant was about what is fairness in ML. It was a pretty open-ended, but with a twist in developing countries. So with the team and my research assistant for that, Yazid, ended up being a co-author on this paper. I was a very junior. I was just starting out at BC, so I was a very, very junior, very excited researcher, and I thought every company would want to talk to me, right? Of course. And I thought every company will open up their data sets to us, and we'll do we'll be able to do some really fun empirical stuff with this topic. And I think I spoke to probably like 15 companies actually, and the answer was always the same. Oh, cool idea. And then there would never be a follow-up call. So we went to some pretty big. There's a lot of effort to get data for an empirical piece, and I actually went to a company that does assessments for hiring in India with a group from this grant project, and then I went to Ghana as well to meet kind of the in the field researchers who actually do this stuff and see what they do. And eventually I end up getting at the asset, but much later than this paper. So in 2018, I was starting up. I met Lily Morse, assistant professor of business ethics and management at AOM, and we had both just finished our graduate degrees, and we were talking like, oh, look, this ethics and ML thing. So that's how we met. And Jerry, of course, was my mentor as I started at BC, and also had a much nicer office, as you mentioned earlier. And we were office neighbors in the same little enclave. So we ended up talking a lot about this. And really the first idea of the paper was just, there's got to be a solution for fairness in ML. But we ended up finding out there isn't really a clear-cut one, and that's how the paper came to be, as we end up discussing. And we saw the issues, this is a special issue call. I thought, that's a perfect fit for this. So that's kind of how we found out about the MI Squarely call. But I'm sure each one of us has different perspectives. So perhaps.
Well, and if you look at the front end of this paper, though, there's some analysis you did, right, showing the difficulty of essentially algorithmically dealing with fairness, right? How did you? Is this your original work? Did you sit down and do it? Were you and Lily and Jerry doing it together? Did you do it and bring it to them? How did that work?
actually the three of us were sitting together a lot in late summer, early fall of 2018. We were working. We were actually co-located on the same floor by
Well, that helps.
by chance. And yeah, we were meeting a lot, and just kind of like hashing out different ideas. And it was definitely a learning experience, probably from more junior ones of us. As a computer scientist by training, I'm always used to having a solution to any problem. But here we found, kept learning more and more. There was no clear-cut algorithmic solution. So that the paper really took a shift from how do you manage to get a fair solution to any ML problem to, okay, this is not actually doable. What are some other fields that can be plugged in here? And that's why the team is so interdisciplinary.
So Mike, you are a computer scientist by training, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I wonder about this. So this we don't have an algorithmic solution to fairness. Is that because we don't have it now, or we can't have it ever? Is that a problem? Where do you see the problem? Do you see the problem that we don't have the right algorithm, or we don't have the right data, or that it's just impossible?
A bit of each, actually. Well, while I'm not a theoretical computer scientist, there are some papers that cited into our paper that talk about the mathematical impossibility of fairness. It's more an issue of well, there are protected attributes, and there are many different protected attributes, and there are many different criteria. There are over 20 criteria. Which one is the correct approach for your particular data problem is, in the end, a human decision. It's not something that a particular formula or template can dictate. And then trying to actually satisfy fairness in some contexts ends up being mathematically not doable. I'm not sure if we will find a solution, but right now the field is not quite there yet. So I think the short answer from my perspective is that I don't think we'll ever have a complete mathematical template for fairness. Will have to always involve a human element, a human decision maker. But we can talk again in 10 years and see if that has changed.
Yeah, well, I'll answer your question, Rucker. It's impossible to have
I'm with Nick on this one.
It's impossible to have a universal definition of fairness, plain and simple, because you define fairness in different ways, and depending on how you define it, you're going to have a different algorithmic adjustment. Jerry.
Yeah, and it always involves trade-offs. Yeah, that fair when you've got dealing with multiple types of groups, you're going to need to make decisions. You've got to balance it some way, and groups are going to have differing approaches on what they think is the best way to do it, and there is no mathematical solution to that. Basically different conceptualizations of fairness, and so go ahead.
No, so I didn't want to interrupt you, but it reminds me of House MD, the TV show. His stance on live and in certain situations, and he would probably say, like, what's fairness? It's such a social construction. There's no such a thing. So it's whatever we want to make it out to be, and if it's that fluffy, iffy construction, then of course it can never be solved, because there's no such a thing. What is it?
Wrecker, your example doesn't work because none of us know what TV show you're talking about.
Really? Am I that old?
Yeah, what is this?
How's MD?
Yes, you are that old, but I know the television show.
Thank you. Another grizzled old veteran. Mike, do you know the show? Make me feel young again.
I do know the TV show.
I'm the only one who doesn't know the show?
So it's not age, it's just cultural out of touch.
Cluelessness.
It must be a Notre Dame thing out in South Bend. They don't have these things called televisions.
Well,
not yet, anyway.
We're too busy wiping the floor with Boston College and football whenever we play them.
So guys, another thing we learned from the different author teams. So there's 7 author teams in total, and we found out that they organized themselves completely differently, right? In the paper. So we had everything. So we had one team that really set up a project management tool and had Gantt charts with milestones for all the different contributions. We had a different team that followed Scrum, like to the dot, and then organized themselves as a team using a Scrum methodology in getting that collaborative paper writing going. And we had other teams that basically just did everything in sequence. So one guy did something, then the other guy stepped in, and then the other guy, and so forth. How did you guys organize yourselves throughout these 1.5 years as you were writing this paper and handling the reviews and all that?
It changed as the paper morphed in different ways. Really, Mike is responsible for most of the first half, and so that was sort of his section, whereas Lily really was the brainchild of the second half of the paper. So first half of the paper, we deal with showing this question about why algorithmic fairness is impossible. And so we go through all the math and we go through all the computer sciencey stuff. And then we come to the conclusion, okay, if algorithmic fairness is impossible, then we have to have the human influence in that, but that's going to differ by conditions, by various conditions, and we have a 2x2, and that was really Lily's brainchild, and she took the lead on the second half of the paper, which is really much more tied to the ethics and the management literature, and my job was to sort of turn it all into, to do a lot of the finessing to turn it into one paper, and so I was the bridge between the two.
So make it one voice, so to speak.
Yes.
And one narrative.
And motivate. I'm a big fan of how you frame and motivate a paper. Has a very significant impact on its ultimate impact and acceptance rate, and that's not something we teach junior faculty a lot lot about.
No, when you're a junior person, you think it's the substance. I have this brilliant argument, people will recognize it and publish me, and then you have to sell it. People are not going to come knocking on your door for your argument. You have to frame it. Yeah, I agree.
Peter Gray was the reviewer on an early paper of mine that I found out later. And he wrote something he said something like, this paper is motivated from this hasn't been studied before perspective. And I see that a lot in papers that get rejected. It's not enough that it hasn't been studied. It has to be important that it hasn't been studied before. And we're going to get something wrong if we don't do this. What is it that researchers will get wrong if they don't read the paper? That is the advice I pass on to authors more as senior editor more often than anything else. And I think it's that question, we need to have that burning question, and what is it that researchers will.
One could even argue that for an issues and opinion paper, it becomes even more prevalent because it's an issue, an issue that's important, that's burning, that leaves a problem if it's left unanswered. That's the entire first half of the paper. And the second paper is then a well-educated and well-articulated opinion about, what we might do about it. And with we, I mean the sort of community of IS scholars here. So, you can't have an INO paper without a burning issue. Right. So if you don't, I think that motivating the paper is even more important than, say, for an empirical or some other article where you say, like, look, because for an empirical article, you can still say, look, this is an important topic that we don't have any data yet. There's no study that has looked at it, so we don't have any data. It's not really burning, but it's
Yeah, I'd still argue the reason we might not have data on it because it doesn't matter. It has to be an important question. First.
That's what John King always said. He said, just because there's no research in this domain, maybe there shouldn't be.
Right. And so you got to convince me that we need the research in this area and more of it. So that's one of my own personal passions. As I get papers, it's like pushing that's probably the guidance I have to give papers most often as I handle them as editor.
So guys, you would have realized that over the course of the review process, we followed a pretty typical. There was SEs, AEs, reviewers, etc. And at some states that switched and became only the editors. But we had 4 of us, right? So, we had very quick rounds, so to speak. Very, very fast. We pushed the reviewers, but we also pushed the authors. So you didn't get a lot of windows of time to work on your revisions. And I remember correctly, you had a couple.
What you mean, the 10 days?
Yeah, exactly. I think you had a couple of rounds where we gave you a little bit less than 2 weeks, correct?
Yes.
So how was that for you?
Well, after we stopped cursing your names, and you guys loosened up a little bit. You said 10 days and then said, okay, 3 weeks. And that was just a little bit better. It just takes a little bit of time to let it all sink in, because we had to, sit back, read the review, figure out what it meant for our paper, try to diagnose what the comments were, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, it's stressful. I think it's doable as long as sort of, you know, one time Lily was on vacation. And so it was hard to, it's like, oh, we got to get her to do questions and she's in Florida for the week. So how do we handle this?
Lily's on vacation right now. I think she's always on vacation, right? Is
That, I mean,
what we're beginning to learn about.
Lily, do you want to step in? Are you able to step in and defend yourself here?
Sure, I can step in. I would say I do go on vacation, maybe as many rounds as you went through with the paper. I'm still trying to recover a little bit.
That's coming.
Whoa! If only we could hear her clearly, then it would have really.
So I still want to go back to you know, Mike and Lily, you as well. You're not typical IS folks, right? I mean, number one, Lily is business ethics. There's probably like 5 people on the planet that do that. Very few people, and then Mike, you're a computer scientist. So I am assuming you both have experience in publishing in other outlets, not IS outlets, like in the computer science outlet, in the Journal of Business Ethics, etc. So any marked difference that you would call out and say like how this publication or review process stands up in comparison to these other fields where you may have published before or where you regularly publish? Or
Lydia, why don't you go first?
Sure. I think there was a learning curve from my end on just understanding the research and understanding the overlap between IS and what we've learned about and what we talk about in management journals. That wasn't something that I came into this project knowing about, and it became a common theme that actually made its way into the paper, which was there is a lot to learn from this research area, this research domain, and more so than that, I was very impressed by the precision throughout the process. I thought that was something that as a management scholar, I could learn a lot from, of how do we become very precise about these complex processes when we are working with humans and machines.
So are you saying that we in IS are more precise than management people, or am I mishearing that?
I wouldn't go as far to say for the entire field, but I certainly thought our interactions with the editorial team were very precise, and that was very helpful to sharpen our argument and exactly what we were trying to say.
All right, Nick, Mike, how was it for you in comparison to computer science journals? I know a few software engineering journals, and I do think they operate a little bit differently to what we do in IS. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of CS is really based on conferences, and that's because of the quick turnaround you need in the field. Really, if you do research, you know, with data or algorithms from 2 or 3 years ago, it becomes, you know, the field has already moved so quickly, right? So in CS, it's pretty quick to publish, though. My doctor is actually in the strategy with an IS angle. Shane Gisa and Tim Cutter are my advisors. In strategy, I think it's pretty similar with IS papers, though a little bit perhaps more. This is my first theory paper of any kind. I've only done empirical work before this, so I don't have a lot of experience with writing like this here. Jerry was the key mentor, but I think from even from the empirical kind of like paper standpoint, it's the process is quite different. I would agree with the precision angle that's much clearer in IS. I think what is asked of you than in other fields in terms of writing theory, though this is my only theory paper, so to speak, so I can't speak too much about that. I am trying a different.
Well, what I think is funny is you keep calling it a theory paper, and I would say it's not a theory paper at all, right? It's an issue and opinion. You bring up an issue
paper,
and
yes.
have an opinion.
A non-empirical paper.
Yeah, so conceptual paper, maybe you want to call
conceptual
it instead
paper.
of theory.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think it is a theory in there, right? I mean, like you have a theory of augmentation. I mean, it's not in that category. I also don't think it's not a standard INO paper either, right? It's a conceptual paper in an INO format. That's how I look at it.
What is a standard INO paper?
Well, you know, like to me, the go-to INO papers are always these. There's a very important problem domain that IS people have never looked at, so let's look at this. Like the Green IS, Malhotra, Watson type of paper. That's still, if someone asks me about an INO paper, that's it. Another INO type of paper genre is these productivity and tenure standards, sort of like how do we evaluate our own performance? We ask too much of our young emerging scholars. That's an issue, and here's an opinion. You know, these are sort of like go-to I&O papers.
Well, the IT artifact paper was an I&O one originally.
That was one, yeah, you're right, yeah, absolutely. And in a sense, and it created a debate, right?
Right.
Yeah, so that was good in that sense. So if you think about your paper being I guess an opinion to trigger a conversation, I suppose, right? What are you hoping you're going to get from this? I mean, do you want a lot of papers that prove you wrong, so to speak?
That is what a standard I&O paper is one that sort of elicits a reaction from the field in some way, whether it's arguing directly with the paper, whether it's picking it up and saying, okay, I think ours would be, okay, this whole concept of augmentation is important. And yet we, as researchers in general, we're just all waving our hands at it. And we haven't done a lot of research to really look at what human AI augmentation or ML augmentation is going to look like. And it's going to be different than previous generations of technology for a lot of the reasons that ML is different. And so we are encouraging sort of further research in this area because we need it. Everybody says, oh, humans need to augment ML, but we don't really have any idea of how to do that and how it differs from previous types of IS information systems. And so if I had a takeaway, it would get people to sort of be cognizant of that issue and start revisiting some of our foundational work to say what applies in an ML situation and what doesn't.
Yeah, so I told Record that I guarantee this paper is going to get thousands of citations, right? And that's because we have an entire field. We do have people focusing on fairness, and we do have people focusing on augmentation. And this will at least give them purchase, right? You want to enter a conversation in the field, and this conversation is not happening in IS, right? There are people in management talking about augmentation. There are people in computer science talking about fairness. We in IS should be linking the two, and we don't have a single paper that I know of that does it.
Yep.
And this is the first.
Yeah.
And
yep.
I think it's going to get a million citations. Right.
Ooh, it started with 1,000. Now you're at
1,000. I'm using extreme numbers. So yeah.
Yeah, because oftentimes you just need a stake in the ground to either support, justify work, or argue against it. But doing that first one is always hard, and that I think is a good I&O piece, because that's an outlet to do something different and to say here's the stake in the ground that other people can argue with it, cite it, whatever. Just let's get the ball rolling.
I agree, but like papers always have a signaling effect, right, onto others. I see, like, okay, this paper got published, so that's an important issue, and that becomes a problem that's worth looking at. So let's devote our attention to it. But even more so, it disproves Nick, which I like, because Nick always runs around and says, young researchers should never write such papers. He always says, I know papers and theory papers, only the grizzled old veterans that use, I don't know, whatever bargaining powers they have to get these papers published. And I'm always telling him he's wrong. And it's nice to see that here we got an example, if we sort of exclude Jerry for a second, that, of course, emerging scholars, freshly minted.
If we exclude Jerry, right?
That's can write these papers. We just learned that he just sit back and told others to do the work. So of course, assistant professors can write these papers. Why?
Yeah. Now that's your interpretation. Here's my interpretation. Jerry Kane sent Arun Rai a note. Arun Rai sent us a note. I mean, I'm not saying that the fact that he was on the paper got it accepted. No, it's a nice paper and it got accepted on its own merits. But there are certain things that grease the wheel and get it in there and get people's attention. Now,
I don't think so.
I don't see it. You're telling me, I don't know.
I've written 2 issues and opinions papers in my career. The first one was I was a junior faculty and wrote it with Rob Fitchman, and then this one where I'm a senior faculty. I actually think I&Os are best from a combination of senior and junior folks, because I know nothing about machine. Before I started this project, I knew nothing about machine learning. I knew nothing about fairness.
Nothing about machine learning?
Well,
you're an IS professor.
Well, I mean, just something, but not enough to write a full paper on. I had to learn it, and I learned it from Mike. And I didn't know enough about ethics, and I learned those things from Lily. And I provided just the sort of the seasoned experience to make sure it came out as a coherent. I knew the literature, and I knew why we could write
and the language, right?
like
Jerry, I think that's important. I mean, like if you look at the composition of your team, right? You got a computer scientist there who knows the algorithmic side of things. You got Lily here to look at the fairness ethics literature on this, but you're not writing for either of these two audiences. You're writing for an IS audience. So, it's a perfectly great idea to get someone in that knows the literature and knows the language in which we talk about these things in our journals. And I say that because I've done similar work trying to get a particular piece of research into other fields, and we didn't have that person, and we never knew how to write the paper, and we literally screwed up because we didn't have the right language. And there's very little you can do. Of course, we sat down and read the last 300 papers that were published in that particular journal, but that's very tough to do. And or put it the other way around, it's a lot easier if you get someone to help you with getting the language right for the audience that you're talking to. Yeah, so I think that's completely fine and very, very strategic.
This is what I think, that you would have never published this paper as an Issues and Opinions if it weren't the special issue. Not because of the merits of the paper are great, but look at the issues and opinions you're talking about. Rick Watson and a couple other luminaries on Green IS. You're telling me a couple junior people who wrote the paper would get it published? Absolutely not. Wanda Orlikowski, our field's biggest celebrity, wrote the why? Because there's almost like a gatekeeper effect on, issues and opinions papers, that only senior people are going to be invited by the editor-in-chief to write them. The fact that this was a special issue and it made its way into the actual review process, and then it was part of a portfolio, is what enabled a couple junior people, I think, to lead it and get it in, right?
Yeah, I'm actually curious. I was going to go look at the categories and see if it specifically says, of course, do we even have issues and opinions anymore?
Yeah. Well, I think, but I think we're mixing up a little bit on sort of qualities of the paper, qualities of the author team, and a little bit of here's what we used to do in the past. So I think in the past, all the INOs papers were only from seasoned veterans, and I think a lot of them, or some of them, were by invitation. That was just a thing we did at that time, right? So there were invited commentaries, etc., and people still do this. I know that Andrew invites papers or commentaries and issues and opinions by particular people because he wants to push certain topics, and he gets the world's experts on these topics to speak to the IS audience. So you make it out to be something negative. I don't think it's anything negative. It's just a strategy to get certain topics populated in our community, right? So but it's not exclusive anymore, right? So if you look at this, is it good that Wanda wrote this paper in 2001? Is it good that Rick wrote this paper in 2010? Absolutely. It doesn't exclude the possibility of other people not writing it. I'm not even disagreeing with you that you're saying, like, not every freshly minted assistant professor should devote all the time to writing only INO papers, so only theory papers. Of course not. But, I just want to stay away from saying you should never do it. Dealing in absolutes, it's never a good idea, I think.
So, yeah, folks, this is a continual disagreement between Ricker and me as far as conceptual.
And you got caught up in the midst of it all.
So, yeah.
I think if you have an opportunity, the nice thing about it is it's thought. You're not collecting data. You're using your experience to make an opinion. And so I go somewhere in between the two of you. I think it's absolutely appropriate for junior people to do it. I think it helps if you have a senior person sort of helping frame it within the literature. And I like those partners.
Jerry, I mean, that goes for every paper, right? So like a nice case study, that's really difficult to do. A good experiment, especially if you have multiple experiments, that's a tough writing challenge just in terms of putting that into, the 30 pages that we got. So all of that is hard to write. So maybe we can close by doing this. I mean, we looked at your paper as editors, right, of all these rounds, and we were excited to have an issues and opinion in the entire portfolio, right? So we had that view across all the different papers, and we had some, simulation papers, we had some ethnographies, we had some experiments, we had econometrics papers, and to us, having an INO on a very important topic felt like a really nice addition to that portfolio of papers. So I think it's fair to say, right? We're really happy that we could publish your paper. I mean, it's a great paper, and it speaks to a very important topic of our time, and hopefully it achieves its goal and attracts more research on this issue. And, I would go even further beyond fairness and augmentation towards ethics in general. I mean, That's been a long-standing gap, so to speak, in IS research. And every 10 years or so, there's an INO paper by someone saying we need to do more research on ethics. I remember Ned Koch doing this. I remember Roger Clark writing these papers. Every 10 years, there's a panel on we need to do more on ethics, and no one ever does. So maybe this one, kicks a little bit heftier into getting us to mobilize our resources toward that end.
The first I know of was in '86, Issues and Opinions with Dick Mason.
There we go. Yeah.
Back in the day. Was there a question there, Wrecker, or is it just?
No, that was basically trying to wrap up. So coming to a close here. So, yeah, I think I just wanted to say congratulations. It is a very fine piece, and we're very proud that we can publish it. And thanks also for coming here and talking to us about this. Lily, you as well. I hope you're still with us. Lily had a few audio issues. We'll try to get them out of it. But Lily, you're still there, right?
Yes, and sorry, I apologize for the audio issues, but I do thank you for bringing in this conversation, and we've learned so much about the process of this paper. We're very proud of it now.
And you should be. You absolutely should.
And I just want to say on the record that both Lily and Mike are the real brain children behind this paper. I just helped guide it to fruition. They deserve full credit for everything that appears in it, and they're co-first authors because they really work jointly on making it happen.
Well, Jerry, we appreciate you saying that, but we suspected that anyway.
Yeah, it's the only reason I made it through the process.
All right, folks. Thanks for coming onto the show and talking to us about this.
Yeah, Wrecker, I have to say, Jerry being humble here at the end of the podcast.
It doesn't happen that often, but occasionally, and you have it on tape now. So,
and one of these days, Wrecker will be equally humble. You know what he said? One of our last podcasts of the previous season. He said that he's the most relevant IS researcher on the globe. is what he told us.
Yeah. Oh my goodness!
Those
Germans. He claims that he's the most relevant IS researcher. So I think that's right. A little arrogant, actually.
That is very arrogant by whoever said that. Anyway, all right, folks. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate it. And look forward to seeing all the articles in print, so to speak, in digital print, I guess.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.